Okay, let's continue into chapter 2. And the way that it opens up, right there off the beginning. As they entered, they saw Dorian Gray, period. Boom. Like if you've ever seen someone and just like fell in love, right? Because they're just so beautiful to you. I mean, we are, like I said, creatures of senses. So our attraction to somebody is also like, at first at least, primarily physical, you know? And so everybody, as we start to see Dorian get introduced to society in London and all of Harry's friends, everyone is just going to take to this guy, and they're all going to comment on how good looking he is. So he pretty much has an easy life, okay? Because I think that people who are that stunningly gorgeous just kind of have doors open for them, right? Which is maybe why Lord Henry thinks so highly of beauty instead of genius. You could be genius and still have to work your ass off. Okay, so chapter 2, as they entered, they saw Dorian Gray. He's seated at the piano with his back to them. He's playing a song. And then before he even turns around, he says, "You must lend me these, Basil. I want to learn them. They're perfectly charming." And he said, "That it depends on how you sit today." And he says, "Oh, I'm tired of sitting. I don't want to be a life-size portrait of myself." Answering the lad. He swings around, and when he caught sight of Lord Henry, a faint blush colored his cheeks for a moment. And he started up. "I beg your pardon, Basil, but I didn't know you had anyone with you." So Harry meets Dorian, and it looks like when Dorian sees Lord Henry, he is like pretty struck too. So that's interesting. Then they're looking at the painting, okay, and for me it's the next page. Lord Henry's looking at him, and he said, "Yes, he was certainly wonderfully handsome, with his finely curved scarlet lips, his frank blue eyes, his crisp gold hair. There was something in his face that made one trust him at once. All the candor of youth was there, as well as all youth's passionate purity. One felt that he had kept himself unspotted from the world. No wonder Basil Hallward worshipped him." All right, so as we talk about appearance and how important appearance is, I want you to imagine this young Dorian Gray as he first enters this book. They're describing him, repeating the idea of youth, 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 youth. Now, when we think of youth, we think of innocence, we think of potential, we think of beauty, fecundity, laughter, joy. I mean, we think when they say youth is wasted on the young, it's very true. It's because like when we're young, we don't see all of that. We can't wait till we get older and experience what life is about. But when we get older, all we do is want to hearken back to the days of being young again, right? Having energy, having that tight skin, having that young looking face, all of that stuff. And so this is very important. One felt that he had kept himself unspotted from the world. And now this is the narrator talking about how Lord Henry feels about Dorian when he first sees Dorian. Okay? So unspotted. Remember that. That's important. And then in the next page it says that Dorian Gray had taken a fancy to Lord Henry. He was so unlike Basil. Now, we know that now, right? Because we got through chapter 1. And he loves the way Lord Henry talks. He's never heard anybody talk like Lord Henry. You know, Basil's very serious. Basil's very artistic, you know. Lord Henry's kind of like a jokester. He's a fun guy. He's like the kind of guy you want to have a beer with and go to out with, because he's going to make everything a good time, okay? And Dorian says to him, "Have you really a very bad influence, Lord Henry? As bad as Basil says?" And Henry answers by not answering. He says, "There's no such thing as a good influence, Mr. Gray. All influence is immoral. Immoral from the scientific point of view." And Dorian, of course, is intrigued, right? Why? And Harry continues, "Because to influence a person is to give him one's own soul. He does not think his natural thoughts are born with his natural passions. His virtues are not real to him. His sins, if there are such a thing as sins, are borrowed. He becomes an echo of someone else's music, an actor of a part that has not been written for him. The aim of life is self-development, to realize one's nature perfectly. That is what each of us is here for." That's interesting, because I think that's what we now refer to as self-actualization, right? Where you kind of reach all your potential. Self-development is the aim of life, he's saying, so you kind of do it on your own. So he continues, and there's so many speeches of Henry in this book, right? Like, you just, and at some point you kind of almost get charmed yourself by, like, ooh, Lord Henry's the way he thinks about life is not so bad. What if I just wanted to live in excess? What if I just wanted to do whatever I wanted to do? Maybe it's not so bad. I mean, he seems kind of intelligent. Maybe it is like a slave life to follow a religion or to follow some kind of code of morality. And I can't think for myself what's right or wrong, what's good or bad, right? So this is kind of the feeling. And here we go, where he starts to talk about this theory of hedonism. Okay, so he begins, I believe that if one man were to live out his life fully, and this is Henry kind of becomes the advocate for hedonism in this book, even though he certainly doesn't live it. I believe that if one man were to live out his life fully and completely, were to give form to every feeling, expression to every thought, reality to every dream, I believe that the world would gain such a fresh impulse of joy that we would forget all the maladies of medievalism and return to the Hellenic ideal. We're punished for our refusals. Every impulse that we strive to strangle broods in the mind and poisons us. The body sins once and has done with its sin, for action is a mode of purification. Nothing remains then but the recollection of pleasure or the luxury of regret. The only way to get rid of a temptation is to yield to it. Resist it, and your soul grows sick with longing for the things that it has forbidden to itself, with desire for what its monstrous laws have made monstrous and unlawful. It has been said that the great events of the world take place in the brain. It is in the brain, and the brain only, that the great sins of the world take place also. And as we go down, Dorian's like, wait, he's talking, and Dorian's like, I don't think Dorian's the smartest guy in the room, okay? Basil's pretty smart. Lord Henry's definitely smart and shrewd on top of it. But Dorian is very, very easily influenced. And if you're very easily influenced and you don't know what you believe and why you believe it yet, then you can become vulnerable. It doesn't make you stupid, but it does make you vulnerable and naive. That's a good word for it, right? But so Dorian Gray's listening and he's like, stop, you bewilder me. I don't know what to say. There's some answer in you, but I can't find it. Don't speak. Let me think. And Dorian sits there and the narrator writes, for nearly 10 minutes he stood there, motionless, with parted lips, eyes strangely bright. He was dimly conscious that entirely fresh influences were at work within him. Now, we have a great narrator in this book because he doesn't leave anything to surprise us. We are very aware of how every single person in the room is feeling. As we have their dialogue, we have also the narrator giving us this hidden super access to how they feel inside. And so literally Dorian's kind of been spellbound. He's like, he's shocked. He's just completely taken aback by this thing that he is said. And here comes down, and like I said, like when I really like something that a writer writes, when I find it so interesting or very new or very true, more than anything, I want to point it out to you guys. And I have repeated this quotation, and if you've been in my class before, you have heard me say this a couple of times this semester, no matter what I'm teaching, because it is about life. He talked about, the narrator's telling us about how moved Dorian is at hearing Lord Henry speak. And he writes, the music had stirred him like that. Music had troubled him, but music was not articulate. It was not a new world, but rather another chaos that it created in us. Words, exclamation point. Mere words, exclamation point. How terrible they were, exclamation point. How clear, comma, and vivid, comma, and cruel, exclamation point. Why am I pointing out the exclamation points? Because you don't use them just for everything. You use them very, very, very specifically when you're imparting emphasis on some very particular point. One could not escape them, and yet what a subtle magic there was in them. They seemed to be able to give a plastic form to formless things, and to have a music of their own as sweet as that of the viol or of the lute. Mere words, exclamation point. Was there anything so real as words? Now, okay, so if you're sitting there and you're like, Professor, what are you talking about? That sounds crazy. What do you mean, is there anything more real than words? Everything is more real than words. Everything I see is more real than words. What is words? Words just go and disappear. No, actually, no. Because everything that we've seen, aside from nature, okay, everything that we've seen created by man first started in someone's head. Okay? Then it's not real. Anything in your head that you're thinking is not really real. Okay? It's like, let's say this. Let's say I'm in love with someone. Let's say you're in love with someone. Okay? Let's say you've been in love with this person for years. It's kind of real to you, right? But you never told them. So, okay. Now I say, I love you. Or you say to that person, I love you. What is so drastic about those 3 words that people are afraid to say it? You know why? Because words are real. Because there is nothing more real than words. Because the second you say that to that person, now everybody has to deal with it. Not just you and that person, but the universe has to deal with it. Right? And it's like that for everything. Every fear you have, if you say it out loud, you give it life. And it's in a very particular way because, number one, whatever I'm thinking, let's say I love somebody, okay? If it's in here, it has no sound, it has no touch, it has no smell, it has no taste, it has no sight. It's formless, right? It's a thought. There's a reason why we can measure the brain, but we can't measure the mind. You see what I'm saying, right? And then, the second I say the word love, well, first of all, I've given it sound. Love, that's a sound. Second of all, I've given it some kind of form because that word in any language is made up of letters or characters. So there is actually a physical shape now to that thought in language, okay? And so now I can see it, and it has some kind of length or width or depth. Do you see what I'm saying? So everything that we look at first came into being through being said to someone else or said out loud. I know, it's true. I think it's true. Okay, so that we point back to. And as a matter of fact, if you, I have another lecture on this channel for Toni Morrison. It's a really shaky camera because I'm traveling in it, but it's a good lecture. And in her Nobel lecture, she talks about the importance of language. And, I think in that lecture, I actually probably have repeated that phrase from Oscar Wilde. Okay, and so now Lord Henry Dorian's attention is rapt. Okay, he's got Dorian's attention. This guy can say, move left, move right, and Dorian's just a puppy. He's a puppy to him. He's going to do anything. So now he's going to get deeper in this philosophy that he has. And he's going to say something that is going to be repeated by Dorian for the rest of the book. Nothing can cure the soul but the senses, just as nothing can cure the senses but the soul. All right, sounds completely wild. Like, what are you doing? Pardon the pun. That was lame. Okay, so what he's saying there is when my senses are overwhelmed or underwhelmed, the only thing that can help my senses, my physical 5 senses, is the sensation of having a soul or some kind of communication or message or feeling that I'm getting from my soul. And likewise, if my soul is in pain and I'm out of sorts and I am a mess because something in my soul, then I can cure that by drinking something that tastes good, eating a good meal, exercising my body, going out and smelling the fresh air. You see what I'm saying? So he's saying that these two things are kind of working in tandem with each other in some way all the time at different levels. And this is going to be very important because for your essay, you're going to write about the idea of duality. And what is duality? Duality is very much us, right? Especially if you believe in the soul. Duality is 2 things existing in one, okay? 2 different things existing in one. So one is the physical body, right? That I inherit, that I have, and these senses, and however long I can reach, however tall I can stand, all these things, right? My physical body is flesh and bone and blood and muscles and tissue and a bunch of other stuff that we can weigh, we can see it, we can measure it very easily. And then the other part of me is that which science calls the animating force of my body, or which pretty much every religion agrees on is the piece of the divine in us. Those are the two different definitions of the soul. The science is the animating force of the body, and the religious, no matter what religion, is a divine piece in you. And we are in some way sharing some creation, right? So those things are in conflict with each other because I can't see my soul, I can't smell it, I can't taste it, I can't touch it, I can't feel it. So how do I know it's real? And yet I really feel like I have one. And maybe some people refer to it as like a sixth sense, right? Some people say that, like your intuition, right? Is that my soul speaking to me? Is it my animal instinct? Whatever. So duality, two things existing in one. Soul, senses. Okay? Now, when two things exist in one, but they are combative with each other, as in they don't mesh like oil and water, right? Then that is called dichotomous or dichotomy. D-I-C-H-T-O, dichotomy, D-I-C-H-O-T-O-M-Y. And so and sometimes do we have duality and it is in harmony, okay? And things work because of it, like the sun and the moon, maybe, is an example of that, right? But other times things exist together and they are dichotomous. And they are constantly at odds with each other. And maybe the soul and the senses are one of those dichotomous things, right? So that's what you're going to be writing about for essay 1. And he talks about Dorian is now talking in chapter 2 about this very visceral sense that he is being changed. I don't know if you've ever had that, like when you're in conversation with someone and you could feel your mind changing, or you could feel something about you changing in that conversation or in that interaction. This is what Dorian feels. And the narrator says he had known Basil Hallward for months, but the friendship between them had never altered him. And here he is, just like in a brief moment of meeting Lord Henry, and he's just like, hello, whatever you have to say, I love it. Okay, so Dorian is definitely now listening to every word Henry says. So whatever Henry says is going to affect Dorian greatly. Okay? Now this is a very important part, what Lord Henry sets up here. What Lord Henry sets up here is a couple of things. Number one, he's going to feed Dorian's vanity because of this painting and because of how beautiful Dorian is. He's going to feed his vanity, and then he's going to terrify him, and then he's going to introduce to him his idea of hedonism. And this all happens in a long paragraph that spans 2 pages in my text. It begins, now you don't feel it now. Someday when you are old and wrinkled and ugly, when thought has seared your forehead with lines, passion has branded your lips with its hideous fires, you will feel it terribly. Now wherever you go, you charm the world. Will it always be so? You have a wonderfully beautiful face, Mr. Gray. Don't frown. You have, and beauty is a form of genius, is higher indeed than genius, as it needs no explanation. It is of the great facts of the world, like sunlight or springtime, or the reflection in dark waters of that silver shell we call the moon. It cannot be questioned. It has its divine right of sovereignty. It makes princes of those who have it. You smile? When you have lost it, you won't smile. People say sometimes that beauty is only superficial. That may be so. But at least it is not so superficial as thought is. To me, beauty is the wonder of wonders. It is only shallow people who do not judge by appearances. You see how crazy he sounds? And yet it sounds like so perfect at the same time. He's dangerous. Lord Henry is a dangerous fellow. And if you know anybody like this in your life, that's a dangerous person too. The true mystery of the world is the visible, not the invisible. Yes, Mr. Gray, the gods have been good to you, but what the gods give, they quickly take away. You have only a few years in which to live really, perfectly, and fully. When your youth goes, your beauty will go with it, and then you will suddenly discover that there are no triumphs left for you. If you've ever read that poem, I believe it's by Robert Herrick. It's called To the Virgins Make the Most of Time. That whole poem is telling these young women, hey, guess what? You're gorgeous now. It's not going to get any better for you. Find a husband now before all that fades. That's exactly the speech. I think it's Robert Herrick. And he continues, every month as it wanes brings you nearer to something dreadful. Time is jealous of you and wars against your lilies and your roses. You will become sallow and hollow-cheeked and dull-eyed. You will suffer horribly. Realize your youth while you have it. Don't squander the gold of your days listening to the tedious, trying to improve the hopeless failure, or giving away your life to the ignorant, the common, and the vulgar. These are sickly aims, the false ideals of our age. Live the wonderful life that is in you. Let nothing be lost upon you. Be always searching for new sensations. Be afraid of nothing. A new hedonism. That is what our century wants. You might be its visible symbol. Now, that's a super important phrase I'm going to come back to in a second, but I just want to finish his speech. I'm going to drop down a bit. We degenerate into hideous puppets. It's important too. Haunted by the memory of the passions of which we were too much afraid, and the exquisite temptations that we had not the courage to yield to. Youth. There's absolutely nothing in the world but youth. Okay, so a couple of things I need to point out to you. Number one, this exact phrase, visible symbol, is going to come back throughout the book as the marked change of Dorian Gray. It's going to be viewed as emblem, visual symbol, visible symbol, visible emblem, however Wilde is going to rephrase it. This is going to be kind of how we plot point this story across. Okay? And the second thing I want you to remember is that Henry says we all degenerate as puppets. That's an important word that is going to come back to Dorian Gray. Oof, can't tell you how far. Years, decades actually. But he says that what we are going to regret was the things that we didn't do. Now, we've heard this all the time, right? Like take a risk, because you're going to regret the things that you didn't do, not the things that you did do. I don't know if that's true. I'll be honest with you. Most of my regrets are things I did do, probably because I do live pretty boldly. But I believe big risk, big reward. So let's just jump all the way to, well, not all the way. We still have a little bit, and I do want to keep this under 30 minutes. And I know that I extrapolate a lot on these things, but I'm really trying to emulate the way that I would lecture this in class. And if we had class, we would have 2 hours together, and I would definitely cover chapters 1 through 7 in 2 hours. But over a course of classes with intro and everything, it's just, we're trying this out, so we'll see how well this goes. Okay. Now we're going to focus on the picture. Because after all, the title is The Picture of Dorian Gray. Okay? The title is not Dorian Gray. The title is The Picture of Dorian Gray. Okay? So as we come to the end of it, you're going to see, whoa. And as I get chills right now just thinking about like how cool the book is really written. We had the focus all on the portrait in chapter 1. Then Dorian walks in and he's the focal point in chapter 2. And now we're going to go back to the picture. Okay? Now, he's been terrified by Lord Henry, right? He's like, oh my God, what if he's right? Like, I'm just going to get uglier and older and nobody's going to want me and no one's going to care about me and I'm not going to, I've taken advantage of all of these potentialities in front of me and these opportunities I have to do, I don't know what, I don't even know what I want yet, but I want the opportunity to do what I want. So he's terrified now, okay? And he looks at this picture. And the narrator says, when he saw it, he drew back, and his cheeks flushed for a moment with pleasure. A look of joy came into his eyes, as if he had recognized himself for the first time. He stood there motionless and in wonder, dimly conscious that Hallward was speaking to him, but not catching the meaning of his words. The sense of his own beauty came on him like a revelation. You know what this reminds me of? I feel like when people become celebrities, they have this team around them that just like is constantly kissing their ass, right? Just to keep them working, keep them going, right? Oh my God, you're so beautiful. Oh my God, you see yourself, you're so hot. Like, oh my God, no one's like you. Who could be like you? Like, you're the baddest. Da 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 da. So Dorian, for the first, and when you have people puffing you up like that around you, I can't imagine just being able to resist that all the time. At some point you want to be like, yeah, I'm sexy, right? Like people think so, people tell me, like you start to get into your head a bit, right? You get full of yourself. Dorian Gray, when we met him, he was a very attractive man, but like Basil said, he was unspotted from the world. Okay? Now Lord Henry gets into his head, and all of a sudden Dorian is like, damn, I'm fine. Like, I look good, right? Like, I didn't even know how good I looked. Okay? So he's getting full of himself now. How sad it is, Dorian says, with his eyes still fixed upon his own portrait. How sad it is. I shall grow old and horrible and dreadful. Now, he's saying this out loud. This is very important. Remember what Oscar Wilde said. Words. Words. Is there anything more real than words? We're about to find out. But this picture will remain always young. It will never be older than this particular day of June. If it were only the other way, if it were I who was to be always young and the picture that was to grow old, for that, M dash, for that, M dash. The M dash is that long hyphenated symbol. It's not a hyphen that's like on the keyboard. You have to insert it as a symbol. For that, I would give everything. Yes, there is nothing in the whole wide world I would not give. I would give my soul for that. Hello. Would you? Would you? Would you give? What would you give your soul for? I don't think there's anything I'd give my soul for. But he says that out loud. Now, if you've ever read Faust, the opera where the composer makes a deal with the devil, we see that transaction in Faust. There's an actual devil person who offers him the world, and Faust signs over his soul. We don't see any supernatural being. We don't see a little gremlin pop up. We don't see devil with horns. We don't even see like some grim reaper. We don't see anything. We don't see any magic, let's say. Any supernatural magic, whatever you want to call it, of this wish actually becoming true. All we see is him say it out loud. Maybe that's magic enough. Saying it out loud, right? I mean, if you say out loud, I'm going to give my soul for something, I know I would take note. And then he says to Basil, I'm jealous of the portrait you've painted of me. Why should it keep what I must lose? If the picture could change and I could be always what I am now, why did you paint it? It will mock me someday, mock me horribly. He's crying. He's crying. Hot tears welled into his eyes. He tore his hand away and flings himself on the divan, like he literally throws a tantrum. He buries his face in the cushions as though he was praying. This is your doing, Harry. Of course, Basil already sees it. He's like, you've been with him for 5 minutes, and everything that I said was going to happen has happened. Dorian is a mess. He's not going to sit for the portrait anymore. He's not going to sit for any portraits with me. He's obsessed with this now painting. And Lord Henry shrugs. Lord Henry shrugs. It is the real Dorian Gray, that is all. It is not. If it is not, what do I have to do with it? Okay, Lord Henry is literally never going to accept blame for anything, so it's really important to remember. Okay? Then, Dorian takes up a knife. No, Basil. Basil takes up a knife. This is going to be really important. And he goes to smash the paint, to tear the painting. He's going to rip up the canvas. And with this, Dorian recognizes something is happening in the room, and he leaps up from the couch after he's been crying. He rushes over to Basil, tears the knife out of his hand, flings it, throws it at the other end of the studio. It's, don't, Basil, don't. It would be murder. Murder? It's a painting. What are you talking about? It's destroying you. It would be murder, he says. Now, let's jump to the last couple paragraphs. Okay, so Dorian is obviously like just having a day with this painting. He's having a moment. Okay, now the very bottom of chapter 2, the very end. I laugh when if there was a person like Harry in my life, I would thoroughly enjoy it, and then I would probably have years separated from this person where like I can't take it anymore because he's just too much. Dorian leaves. Okay, goodbye, Harry. Goodbye, Dorian. Come and see me soon. Come tomorrow. Certainly won't forget. No, of course not, cries Dorian. And Harry? Yes, Basil. This is what Basil says to Harry as they're all leaving. Remember what I asked you when we were in the garden this morning? This was this morning. It was like maybe hours ago. And Harry says, I've forgotten it. And Basil says, I trust you, right? He's going back to that, don't influence him, don't take him away, don't ruin him. And Harry, of course, again, shifts his answer by not answering, but not even acknowledging it. And Harry says, I wish I could trust myself, said Lord Henry, laughing. So clearly, the type of guy that is fun to be around, very dangerous character. He's completely turned Dorian Gray around in this one chapter within 5 minutes of us meeting him.